You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
One of the ongoing themes we talk about here on the Seattle Real Estate Podcast is that with the eviction moratoriums, you can't boot tenants out for non-payment of rent. The longer that you extend out these moratoriums, the worse it's going to be when you finally rip off that Band-Aid. Guess what? We're starting to peel off that Band-Aid. It's not looking good. These notices from landlords are beginning to show up at renters' doors, stoking fears. So landlords haven't been able to jack up rents, and which they normally do. Everything's going up in price, right? I mean, everything. Go to the grocery store, you go to whatever store, and you're like, wow, is it just my imagination, or did that just go up a lot? I mean, everything has gone up. Everything has gone up. And yet rents haven't. They haven't been able to, because in so many markets, we're just these moratoriums. And so now this is kind of part of that. All right, you had these moratoriums in place. Now they're being lifted. Here we go. And one of the things I've talked about consistently is the faster you get rid of these moratoriums, the faster we can start dealing with this and work our way through it, because it's not going to be pretty. And we all kind of know that we're waiting for some of those federal funds to hit the local government so that they could pay off the landlords, tenants. It's just a huge mess. In what world do we, try and cover one segment of the population and the other segment? Well, you guys just kind of figure it out on your own. You guys just do your own thing. Yeah, good luck with that. I hope you're able to keep paying those mortgages and the insurance and maintenance and taxes and stuff. But, the guys occupying your home, they don't have to pay. I mean, that's just, it's insanity to me. But, I'm a real estate guy, so I kind of see things in black and white. And I think you should be able to collect rents no matter what on a place that you are renting out to somebody, because they signed a contract and that's how this works. So we're coming full circle here, and we're going to start to talk about, oh, hey, rents are going up. Is that shocking? It's not shocking to me at all. We've been talking about this for a long time. It's not shocking. This is just how this goes. All right, so let's jump in here. Before we do, and this is an article from Bellingham, which is to the north. It's got Western Washington University. It's up close to Canada, but it's in the Pacific Northwest. So we're going to cover it here in the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies, but more importantly, I read the news that hopefully you want to hear. All right, let's get into it. Noah Braley received the text that would upend his plans for the next year a little over a week ago on July 1st. Your rent will be going up by a lot, his property manager wrote, but don't freak out. I've been saying, hey, freak out, because you're going to have some rent increases, and all of the restrictions that you're placing on landlords, it's going to mean massive rent increases. And why is that? Because you're further constricting supply. And when you further constrict supply, there's one way for rents to go up. When you further constrict supply of housing in general, housing prices go up. That's kind of supply and demand. And we've had minimal supply and big demand, and the supply for rental properties is just being ratcheted down. Oh, you can do this. You can't do that. All right. You can't do that. Here are the restrictions. If you're letting a school teacher rent your place, here's the deal. I mean, some of these you can't evict them during the school year. I mean, all these restrictions that have been put in place. When some of these get restricted, guess what landlords are going to do? They're either going to sell, or they're going to jack up their rents, or they're going to boot out their tenants and get new tenants in paying way more. That's kind of how this goes. But don't freak out. No, I think you should be worried, because this is the rebound. This is the boomerang effect of all these regulations being put in place. But people thought they were such a great idea on the front end. And I get it. You don't want to have millions of people evicted onto the streets. But it's got to be it's got to be equitable, right? You cover one side of the equation, tenants. You got to cover the other side, landlords. And we didn't see that happen. So all the money being lost out there by landlords, they're going to bump up some rents, guaranteed. It's kind of like all the, the shoplifting happening in San Francisco and to big corporations. Do you think prices go down because of that? Let's see. Is that the way this works? No. They bump up prices to cover their bottom line because these are businesses. Landlords do the same thing, right? So this tenant is like, I'm like, excuse me, don't freak out, said Braley, who has lived in the building since 2013 when he was still an urban planning student at Western Washington University. How much is it? The answer is $405 a month increase. All right, which Braley discovered when he returned home from his job as a line cook at Italian restaurant Storia Cucina. The letter taped to his door was sent by Sunrise Property Management, SON-RISE, Property Management, and it infuriated Braley. It said that starting in September, rent for his 2-bedroom apartment would increase from $1,195 monthly to $1,600. All right, $405. Was it low before this? That's the question I would want to do. And a lot of what I talk about is what I've done over a 30-year career as a real estate appraiser. And so how do you figure out if rents are low? You do a rental survey analysis. You look at a bunch of other similar units in the area. All right, $1,195 is probably pretty low. Should have been $1,350. So this increase on a market rent basis, what is equivalent for the market? What's rent? What is market rent in this area? It's more like a $250 increase. So I don't know if that's the situation that's happening here, but oftentimes that is what's going on. Somebody keeps rents low. If you have been a rental, if you've been living in the building since 2013, you're probably getting a pretty good size break on rent because you've been paying this whole time. All of a sudden we get to this deal where other tenants are probably not paying in this apartment complex and you've got all these restrictions and stuff going on. Guess what property management's going to do? All right, we need to cover our costs. Here we go. We're raising rents to market. So if you can prove that they're not market rent, then you either move out and go rent an apartment that is market rent. That's kind of really all you can do. You can say, all right, yep, nope, don't want to pay. Good luck with that rent at $1,600. But so many people are all worked up. Oh, we've got a market rent increase. This is unfortunately in our economic situation where we are. This is what we're doing. And I know it's going to be tough for a lot of people, but these are the consequences of monkeying with the free market economy when it comes to rent. Here we are. I can't afford to pay this. I have $300 student loans I'm trying to pay off. I've got car insurance. I've got $250 health insurance bills, said Braley, who has not missed a rent payment throughout the pandemic. All right, here's what the landlord would say. You haven't been paying me rent. I haven't been paid rent on this unit. I haven't been paid on rent on this unit. I have a $1,300 mortgage on that property. I've got a $2,500 mortgage on that property. The unit you're not paying rent on, I have to pay for the broken dishwasher. I've got $280 homeowner's insurance bill coming up. I've got taxes coming up. So you can have, the statement, I have $300 student bill loans. Nobody cares. Unfortunately, nobody cares. You either pay the rent increase or you don't. That's unfortunately the brutal reality of this game. So said Braley, who has not missed a rent payment throughout the pandemic. Rent on top of that, where am I going to find an extra $4,000 a year? Prices have gone up. This is what we're working with. And they're going to go up dramatically with all these restrictions in place. They're going to go up even more. Braley's situation is not an anomaly. Rent prices throughout the area are skyrocketing as the state begins a phased lifting of its pandemic-spurred eviction moratorium. In Bellingham, many tenants are getting the unwelcome notification that their rent will increase in the coming months, prompting anger as they grapple with the question of whether they can continue living in their homes. Now, a lot of people want to say, well, you just got to build some more housing. You got to get some more housing supply in the equation, and that'll drop prices. In areas like Bellingham that have been cheap for a long, long time, the reason they're becoming more expensive is people can't afford Seattle, and so they're moving to an economic area like Bellingham that has historically been cheaper. So that spread out effect, that is what's impacting the marketplace. Further out places, that's why I'm rating it. Bellingham. Google where Bellingham is. You want to talk about upper left USA? Yeah, it's right there. It's as far up as you can get before you hit the Canada. So, so these further out kind of big, small cities, I call them, like on the way in between Seattle, you've got an Everett, you've got like a Marysville, you've got, a handful of other big cities, not big cities, but smaller cities in between. And then you've got Bellingham kind of to the north, and they're going to experience some pretty massive rent increases. And rent increases in Seattle, they're happening too. Because I've already said so many times why this will happen and why this is happening. And there are a lot of people who can't afford these rent increases, and I get that. But we kind of knew going into this, if you tweak the market in a certain way, this is going to be your end result. So I'm not saying, hey, I told you so. I'm kind of like, these are the results of the actions that we've taken in a real estate market based on capitalism. So rents are going up. There's just no way to get around that. In the final days of June, Governor Jay Inslee announced a bridge to transition out of the eviction moratorium established last March to keep people housed and prevent further spread of COVID-19. Some of the issue there, and I'll finish off the sentence of this paragraph. Although evictions for unpaid rent are still limited, the governor's proclamation allows landlords to increase rent, which was prohibited under the eviction moratorium. So this is the easing of the regulations is what we have happening. What I think a lot of politicians don't understand, and the people who made the stuff up, the guidelines, is that you've got normal increases that happen in a market. Now, for the last year and however many months, 4 months, whatever it is, all of those increases are going to happen at once because that's what's going to happen. You normally have these small increases along the way, maybe only one increase, but now you've probably got a couple of increases there on top of the fact that everything has gone up. Everything has gone up in price. And your supply has been constricted of rental housing. And a lot of people are like, we don't really care about the mom and pop landlords. They're not a real factor. Well, when they sell a large segment of their rental housing supply, you might care because now you're going to be all up in arms about, rents are going up. Unfortunately, this is how this goes. Landlords are not allowed to raise rent during a lease term, but may do so for month-to-month tenancies. Like Braley's, as long as they give notice 60 days in advance. If a tenant is given less than 60 days notice, they can contest an improper rent increase according to the Tenants Union of Washington State. All right, but okay, so what you've got going is that because we've got a restricted supply, landlords can basically say, here's your 60-day notice. If you don't want to occupy this property, I'm going to need you to leave because I can find somebody pretty easily who can afford that rent. That's unfortunately the scenario here, and you're going to hear a lot more about that. Bellingham tenant support groups are starting to hear community members, particularly seniors and those with disabilities, voice fears about increasing rent. Absolutely, that's going to be a thing because you can't really put seniors out in the streets, and people taking care of other people with disabilities. Difficult, horrible situation. I mean, there's just nothing you can say about this that makes it any easier for folks to be dealing with. It's a terrible scenario. If landlords are following the law, however, there's not much a tenant can do, said Debbie Patton, Community Services Director with the Nonprofit Opportunity Council. She advises renters to try and communicate and work with landlords. The council is still figuring out how to best advise tenants seeing rent increases. Okay, so one of the things is that even though we had the eviction moratorium and rent stayed the same, as we get out of these, nobody kind of figured out, even though the tenants are going to have their rent paid, or in like the city of Seattle says, landlord, we'll pay your rent, but only like 70% of it. We need you to work with us on this. They're not asking the tenants to pay anything back. Tenants aren't chipping in. It's the landlords covering the tenants. And that money's got to come from somewhere. Where does it come from? Out of the sky? Does it miraculously drop as manna? No. The rents get jacked up. That's where income comes from. So I think people thought, well, okay, so the worst of this is going to be over when we can get that federal money into the local governments and they can start paying off the landlords. Okay, that is kind of phase one. Phase two is rents are going up. And that's where we sit right now. It's just becoming much more expensive and difficult to afford to live here, Patton said. We have seen rent increases fairly steady over years, but not big spikes. Well, this one's been a big lack of anything for landlords, right? But not big spikes. We are starting to barely hear about and are anticipating. Current rental vacancy hovers around 2% in Bellingham. That's sold out. That is sold out. We talk about the rental housing or the supply housing in like Snohomish County. I just did my market in a minute. That was some weird feedback. I just did my market in a minute segment. I just read it. And Snohomish County has, which is the county just to the north of me, has 10 days of inventory at the end of last month. 10 days. Boom. Today, July 14th, day I'm recording this, you stop any homes coming on the market with the absorption rate of how many homes buyers are buying on a daily basis. How long does your current supply of housing last on the open market? And in Snohomish County, that's 10 days. And then there are no more homes for sale. There are no more homes for buyers to buy. Okay. So so we've got a situation where homes for sale is basically sold out. Here in Bellingham, vacancy rates hovering around 2%. That is insane. That means there's no rental housing available. There's basically no rental housing available. 2% indicates this is 1, this is 2. And I'm raising one finger for those of you on the audio versus 2, which is, correct. Sometimes my hand signals don't match up to my brain signals, which is often. So 2% vacancy in Bellingham. That's nuts. That means for every 100 rental units, there are about 2 vacant. And what that means is just normal monthly turnover. There's a tiny little bit, and you might have a unit sit for a week, and that's what we're counting. A healthy rental vacancy rate is 5% to 7%. So we are way below that. We basically just don't have, in this market in Bellingham, you ain't got no rentals. That's not very good English, is it? And that's my point. So a healthy rental vacancy is 5% to 7% according to the city. At the same time, Bellingham has become less affordable. The fair market rate for 2-bedroom apartments in 2020 was $1,175, up from $1,028 in 2018. What's market rate now? Is it $1,600? Did the guy that we talked about in this story, does he have a 3-bedroom? I can't remember. Did we state what he has? Did we talk about what he has? I don't think his 2-bedroom apartment. All right. So $1,195 to $1,600. Is $1,600 a stretch? Is that a massive stretch? I don't know. So there's a huge shortage of affordable rentals, said Sage Jones, a volunteer campaign manager with People First Bellingham, a coalition pushing for tenant-friendly ballot initiatives. Okay, so you got all these tenant-friendly ballot initiatives, and unfortunately, they're having the exact opposite in the marketplace of what people are intending. That's what's going on. The housing market is incredibly tight and unhealthy. People just don't understand the dynamics of the market. And there's a, crazy old guy like me sitting around going, that's not going to work out. That's not going to be pretty. And then when you see these headlines, you're like, oh man, because there's people that are going to be displaced. There just are. So what's the answer? I don't have a great answer, but at the beginning of the pandemic, I basically said, all these restrictions, these eviction moratoriums. I'm a no-go. Get the people that are most impacted by the Rona out of the way, get them out of the way, let everybody else kind of continue as normal. That was my solution, because I kind of look at things from a big picture. How about all the people who died from opioid overdoses that went up substantially during the pandemic? You got all this other, deaths and things happening from other things and other impacts that, we're trying to, we just surpassed 6,000 deaths in Washington state for the whole damn state, 6,000 deaths from the Rona. How many people have died and been impacted horrifically from all these shutdowns and all this other stuff? That's the storyline we're talking about now. And now you've got the Band-Aid of eviction moratoriums and rent increases being ripped off. And it's not going to be good. When Braley found out his rent was increasing, he immediately called Sunrise Property Management for an explanation, but didn't get a response. Well, they don't owe him a response. If they're within the letter of the law, it's like, all right, here's what we got going. Here's what we're doing. If you don't want to play ball, unfortunately, somebody else will, because there's 2% vacancy, right? Determined to talk to someone, Braley went to the company's office himself, eventually speaking with 2 property managers outside the building. And I feel for this guy. I mean, this is horrific. He's working as at a restaurant. He's not making a ton of money. He's kind of just getting by. And he's like, where am I coming up with an extra $4,000 this year for this rent increase? And it's actually $4,800. Because, 400 times 12, that math thing, I think it's $405. That's what our increase, $1,295 to $1,600, $1,195 to $1,600. Yeah, that all makes sense. Sorry, doing math out loud there. So they told him that they didn't support the building owner decision to raise rents and were trying to advocate for tenants. But there was nothing they can do to stop the owner, Braley told the Bellingham Herald. He said they recommended he write a professional letter to the owner, which Sunrise could pass along, but Braley was suspicious the document would be altered or never get to its intended recipient. Sunrise Property Management declined to comment for this story and would not reveal the name of the building owner. Well, look in the tax records. That's pretty easy to figure out. But does it matter? This landlord and this owner, they've probably had a bunch of people who haven't paid rent over the Rona. And so here we are. This is what's going on. This is going to happen all across the United States. And it's just, this is the inevitable kind of that wave going out to sea coming back. And guess what? When it comes back, it's a little bit bigger. They're telling me like, oh, maybe you could try finding a third roommate. Ha, 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 Braley said. They're laughing it off. And I'm like, this is not funny. What about this is funny to you? Understood. It's not funny at all. Having people's budgets rocked, not funny at all. But it's also basic economics. All right? We've got some increases coming. We're experiencing those. And there's going to be a lot of upset people. Guaranteed. And, yeah, it's a brutal time, isn't it? I deal with real estate brokers who are representing buyers a lot of the time, and it has been a horrific market for that. Buyers trying to get a home, trying to find an affordable home that matches their budget. But nobody really kind of gives two you-know-whats about that storyline, because it's people, they're creating the American dream. Maybe they're buying their second home, whatever it is. But all these stories of there's no supply, there's no supply, there's no supply, those don't really make sense to people until you're like, all right, all of those people who couldn't buy homes, they're now renting. Existing rental pool is down. Restrictions created on all landlords has created where there's less supply of rental housing. Mom and pop rental landlords selling because it's a perfect time to sell. They can get top dollar, and maybe they're retiring, they're moving on, they're moving to Arizona, they're moving to Texas, they're moving to wherever, right? But people are like, we don't really care about the mom and pop. It's not that important. Screw those guys. Well, you're paying attention now, right? Ooh, geez, rents are going up. Overcome with frustration, Braley turned to the internet, posting about his rent increase on the digital community forum Nextdoor. The post blew up. garnering over 200 comments within a week. Some responses came from tenants facing a similar fate, like Bonnie Andrews, who's lived in Bellingham for 12 years. Andrews' rent will be increasing by $94 a month from $11.54 to $12.48. That's a more reasonable increase. She lives in a 3-bedroom apartment in the Meadows by Vintage with her 17 and 20-year-old sons and her boyfriend, who works as a cashier at a local supermarket. She thought about downsizing to a 2-bedroom. Okay, so she's got a 3-bedroom. That's really cheap rent at $12.48. It's probably a dive, right? Don't know, but that'd be my total guess. And when I share these thoughts with you out loud, I'm literally just sharing what comes to my mind. And it may not be right, but oftentimes it is. She thought about downsizing to a 2-bedroom when she heard about the rent increase, but her elder son needs a room of his own since he has autism and often screams through the night. So there's so many people with so many, life issues, and increasing rents is just more than they want to handle, can handle, whatever. And then you end up with a homelessness situation. It's just brutal, right? Ugh. I can't afford to move either, Andrew said. When you're in low-income housing, you're here because you can't afford first month, last month. All right, so there's the answer. It's a 3-bedroom. It is, it's in low-income housing. She assumes the rent increases are occurring because landlords want to recoup pandemic-fueled financial losses. That is one part of it. The other part is things are just going up. Up a flight of stairs, Andrew's 57-year-old neighbor, Monica Young, is also fretting about the rent increase. Young has lived in Bellingham since the mid-90s and works 46 hours a week as an in-home caregiver and a caretaker for those with special needs. She loves Bellingham, but isn't sure if she'll be able to stay here if rent prices climb any higher. She already can't afford dental insurance. I'm trying to save, but with the squeeze, it's harder and harder, Young said. I don't think I'll be able to retire. I'll have to work until the day I can't. That's the situation a lot of people are in, right? Just keep on going. I don't ever intend on retiring, but I know there's a lot of people that are like, man, I can't wait till I quit my job and just effing retire. I don't want to have to deal with my boss anymore. My coworkers are morons. I hate my job. So I know there's a lot of people out there like that are struggling. And this is a serious struggle because they're going to have to keep going. And then family members take care of them if they can, if they don't have the financial means, they don't get enough Social Security. I don't know, how people make it on Social Security, especially in the Pacific Northwest. It's so expensive here. I don't understand, and then families step in and take care of people. And I think there's more of that. But then you see a lot of people on the streets who they didn't have the family members to support them, right? And that's why they are where they are. So maybe you've got some mental health care issues. Your family can't support you. You've, you got some addiction issues. That describes whatever big percentage of the homeless population that we see, right? So many renters are concerned not just about what rent hikes will mean for them and their families, but how it will alter the fabric of Bellingham. And this is altering the fabric of cities all across the United States right now. Maybe not in your hometown, but in areas that have strong, economics. They've got strong job market. I was reading a story somebody sent me. Who sent it. And it was Portland was the 10th best rated place to live in the United States, despite just some of the lunacy happening down there, just craziness happening down there. But as a whole, based on a bunch of criteria that kind of made sense, it's like, all right, still a pretty cool place. You think of a community like Portland, you think of the nightly protests by the not so peaceful protesters, for a full summer and into a fall. And you think, horrible place to live. But the job economy in Portland, strong. Job economy in Seattle, stronger. And that's what's changing the fabric of a Bellingham, because an area like Seattle, now you've got people commuting in from Bellingham, which is an hour and a half away, something absurd like that. We've got people, I remember a few years ago, maybe it's 5 or 6 now. How you think, that's just happened last year. And you look and it was like 5 years ago. You're like, where did that time go? Time is moving on. But I remember we started selling homes down in the Olympia area, in the Olympia market, which if you look at a map, that's pretty damn far south of Seattle. It's a haul. It's a commute. Is that an hour and a half? Is that 2 hours with a little bit of traffic? Probably, but we're starting to see people commute from an area like that down south and an area like Bellingham up north into the job markets where there are better jobs. That is happening pretty consistently. And so it's like an LA market. We used to joke 20 years ago about people driving 2 hours each way commuting in a Los Angeles market. Now we've got that going on here in the Pacific Northwest. And you might say, well, in my little town of 50,000 people, I can still get a really affordable whatever, and my commute is only 15 minutes. Yep, that's fine. But if you want to live in an area that has better employment opportunities, this is where you go. This is maybe where you make it happen. And unfortunately, how much you spend in rent, that's the fabric that's being kind of just torn apart in so many of these communities, because people want to be in areas where they've got employment opportunities, and those are in the bigger cities. But the bigger cities, rent is going up, even like a Bellingham. If workers and lower income individuals are priced out of their homes, the community could become a sanctuary only for the well-to-do, said Patton, who works with the Opportunity Council. And many of the people who have spent their whole lives working in Bellingham will be forced to spend the end of their lives elsewhere or commuting in from elsewhere. That's kind of how I see it going. And does that suck? It does, because it takes out a segment of your working population. They no longer have a vested interest in that city, right? We hear from seniors that just feel they have done everything right. They've paid their bills. They are concerned with their housing. Their most basic need will become unaffordable, Patton said. Then we're living in a community that is only for those with wealth. Andrews, the Meadows by Vintage tenant, sees Bellingham becoming the sort of place that's unwelcoming to lower income families. But even before these recent rent increases, there were community efforts to keep Bellingham affordable. That's part of the mission of People First Bellingham, a coalition of political and social organizations gathering signatures to put 4 ballot initiatives on the November 2nd ballot. The goal of the initiative is to ensure Bellingham continues to be a welcoming place to live for the workers who make the city what it is. We see how much workers are struggling, she said. We believe workers have a right to the city. Back in his apartment near downtown, Braley sits at the small dining room table in his common space, sipping a weak cup of coffee. Although he spent the last 8 years building his nest in this apartment, he decided to move out after he was notified of the rent increase. He's moving to a 4-bedroom house with a friend in the York neighborhood, where his share of the rent will be $650 per month as opposed to $800. But he can't stop thinking about the other tenants in his building who might not be so lucky. Why is it so sudden? It seems rather heartless, Braley said, because this might ruin some people's lives who live here, who can't afford to live anywhere else. And it's probably going to. It's not might ruin. It will have an impact on a lot of people. And this is just one of those situations we got to work through that I think a lot of folks on the front end of the whole Rona thing didn't really consider. All right, you got to pay the Pied Piper at some point. The Grim Reaper comes in the form of increased rent, booting people out. Hey, you haven't paid. That's the situation we're at now. I know this was kind of a Debbie Downer podcast, but unfortunately it's reality and it's reasonable. But a lot of people just want to kind of put their head in the sand and go, why are rents going up? Well, because we created this situation where that is happening. And this is the deal. So as this storyline continues, I will carry it. I'll continue covering it right here in the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for being a listening, viewing, whatever it is, member. I'll catch up with you soon. Until then, stay safe. We'll see you then. Bye. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know when our next video is out.